Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Jeff Robb. We are having one of our first hybrid events where Jeff is joining us from England. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's late in England. The exhibition is a solo exhibition here at Sohn Fine Art. It's on view through January 2022. And the exhibition is called Capturing the Invisible. So Jeff, you received your master's degree from the Royal College of Art, where you studied fine art holography. And what type of photographic work were you doing prior to that, and what led you to the pursuit of such a unique medium?
I actually got into photography really early on, like when I was like 10. I was already taking photographs. My father was a professor of fine art at a university, and had access to all the stuff. And I was mainly taking kind of landscape photographs. I mean, photographs of everything, but mainly landscapes. I had a large format camera. I was quite young. But I had a biology teacher at school who taught me how to develop films, and I had my own darkroom at home really early on when I was about 12. And photography really became my passion very early on. So I was taking a lot of photographs from very early on, and specifically got into large format landscape holography. And I applied to go to art school when I left school, but I also applied to universities, and I got into art school in London. And they said, do you have any other strings to your bow? And I said, well, I could go and do a science degree. And they said, well, if you stay at art school, you're just allowed to take back photographs. If you can do something else, you can always come back to art. So I ended up going to university and doing a degree in botany.
In botany?
Yeah. So I've got a degree in botany. But I was still taking photographs through university. And I had an exhibition of photographs right at the end of university in Museum Street, opposite the British Museum. And one of the people who came to see that was the head of hologram making at the Royal College of Art, a guy called Nick Phillips. And he saw that show and he said, why don't you come and study? He said, your photographs remind me of holograms. Now, I never saw that. And I said, yeah, the problem is that you've got to have holograms to go there. And he said, he was head of physics at Loughborough University. And he said, he was amazingly good to me. And he said, come to Loughborough. And he paid for accommodation. And he said, what I want you to do is set up a holography lab. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it. And he said, well, here's a book. And you can have some, PhD students to help you. And I started making holograms. And it was with those holograms and a photographic portfolio that's how I got into the Royal College of Art. So it was really landscape photography is specifically to answer your question. But I was already making holograms, and I was buying disposable. At the time, you could buy disposable lenticular cameras, so you could take a series of photographs, send off the film, and you get back a series of lenticulars. So that would have been 1988. So that's when I really started with the 3D side of things. I'd already by then I'd got a bit sort of jaded with photography itself. I was under the impression that the best photographers had already been and gone. and we're all in America between about 1930 and 1950. And there's a side of me that still thinks that's true. You know, Paul Strand and Ansel Adams, obviously Cartier-Bresson, those type of photographers, as I'd call them.
Do you feel that they sort of paved the way?
Well, I think that, you know, with a lot of media, yeah, I mean, obviously at the beginning, it's easy to pave the way, isn't it? But I still think that some of the best photography was done in that time. And interestingly, the advent of digital photography and everyone having a camera, I suppose it's changed the type of photographs that have been taken. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're any better than a lot of those photographers. So I was kind of a bit sort of jaded with just traditional photography. I'd already spent 10 years in a darkroom by that point. And holography just seemed this really magical medium, which made no sense at all and was incredibly difficult and posed a huge technical challenge to even get an image. And so I kind of poured myself into that. And again, I kind of rediscovered the joy that I had when I first started photography in a way. It was like a sort of rebirth in interest for me. And, you know, I just loved doing it and spent every waking hour making holograms.
I think it's kind of interesting that you started with landscape, but the majority of your work is figurative.
Well, when I was making holograms initially of landscapes, funny enough, you wonder how you make a hologram of a landscape, but I've got a piece in the Victoria and Albert Museum from that time.
I've seen it.
So it's kind of like a landscape made of light, which is kind of what landscapes sort of are anyway. But it was at that time then I started moving to much more figurative work as a kind of as a mechanism really for showing other things in a way. But I'll get onto that in a bit. But yeah, so landscape photography. I mean, the thing is now, so many people do it and they do it so well. I find it very rare that you see a landscape photograph that you feel you haven't seen before. And so that's why I don't do it. There's people who do it better. And I find a lot of it is very repetitive. But of course, the beauty is that sometimes you see something that is really fantastic and you realize that those people are really putting in the effort to try and do something new with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've been experimenting in three-dimensional processes for a very long time, and viewers tend to be awestruck by the possibility that what they are seeing in front of them is a two-dimensional medium that appears to be three-dimensional. Can you walk us through that process of how a lenticular is created?
Yeah, I mean, often people call them holograms. Holograms are made with lasers and generally stationary. Although for many years I had access to a pulse laser where you can make holograms of people and moving things. But they're very different techniques. But essentially, either you have one camera taking lots and lots of photographs, or you have lots of cameras taking one photograph. And generally, what I tend to use now is arrays of cameras, a bit like a time slice in the Matrix, that kind of setup, being triggered by I build these systems myself, and have all these cameras firing simultaneously and flash firing at the same time, and in that way I'm able to capture fast moving objects in 3 dimensions, and then those pictures are then taken and re-registered together, and then they're printed, quite often using something like a light jet or a lambda, and then those are then UV bonded to a lens, and that has to be done extremely accurately, to within like a 10,000th of an inch over the whole distance of the print, and it's a process that is quite easy to describe, but it takes a few years to really get the hang of it, and it's quite an old process. There's 100-year-old lenticulars made of bakelite, but I kind of quite like that, and perhaps a bit like a photographer working with cyanotype or an old process. I would say the really big change, the evolution in it, really, for me, was the switch from analog to digital. So in the old days, everything was rostrum cameras, developing films. I remember making a hologram that switched from one image to another, and I had 2 enlargers, and I had one neg in one and one negative in another, and I'd exposed a piece of paper 10 seconds in one to one, 20 seconds under another, and then manually form this transition, which would take you about 2 seconds on a computer these days. I think it took me 2 days, and ended up with like 100 photographic prints. Then I made holograms of, and that was the way to get a kind of stereoscopic 3D transition. So, and I went out, in my commercial career, very early on, we went out and shot the NFL players in Los Angeles for the baseball cards, and all that was done on film. And we were rushing off, as the assistant was rushing off to labs to get the films processed, because they have these days when the NFL has these days where all the promotional material is shot over a weekend. Yeah, they have fake crowds come in, and all those promo shots. So they'll all put on one particular team's top, and then they'll have a guy catching a ball with his team behind him. I bet an eagle-eyed person could see the crowds are the same in a lot of the shots, and but all that stuff was done on film, and I guess the big change. I was involved in doing a portrait of the Queen of England around 2004, and that was kind of when it switched from it was just at the cusp where we could shoot enough high quality frames. 2004, 2005. So for me, in terms of the process and it evolving, it really, there was a guy called Ken Connolly in North Carolina who made the lenses that you need. Sadly, he died last year. But he was instrumental in bringing the lenticular photographic technique to everyone. He was a game changer.
As have you been.
Well, you're talking about the pioneers of photography and how they were able to each, tread new ground. And holography is a complex subject. I won't talk too much about it. But it did strike me very early on that with lenticular photography, it was really untouched in terms of what people were doing with it. very, very similar things. People tend to dip, even now, they tend to dip into it. They might have one image changed to another because they can very easily generate two pictures in Photoshop. That doesn't require a lot of skill. But there's very, very few who know and understand the process of the stereoscopic process. And of course, I'd been doing that forever with the holograms. And so it was a very short step. Well, it was no step at all, really, going from the sort of sequences that we were making holographic stereograms to making lenticulars. There was another guy in Britain called David Berder, who was like the sort of grandfather, really, of the lenticular technique here. And he, you know, he learned from other people himself, but he was the one who really was producing the commercial stuff that was very good. But no one was using it as an artistic medium at all, as far as I could tell. No one. So I thought, goodness, you know, it was like the Wild West. You know, you could do what you liked, and you'd be the first one to do it. And you know, subsequently, I've had people saying, "Oh, you know, it's not fair because you've done everything." I mean, that is obviously completely false. But there was a sense that it was just I'd walked into an orchard and all the trees were full of fruit. And I just couldn't really understand why no one had done it. But maybe it's because there's no feeder system. There's nowhere, there's nowhere you can go and study at a college. So while there's hundreds of thousands of students coming out, sculpture, backgrounds, painting, illustration, video art, filmmaking, you know, there's courses on all those things. I might be wrong, but I don't believe there's any courses on specifically, you know, a proper course, 3 years course on how to, you know, on three-dimensional imaging. I mean, hard copy. I don't mean, you know, 3D printing of objects or that thing, but, you know, holography, lenticular photography, those kind of things. There's just no way you can learn it. You have to learn it yourself. So, I mean, that's good for me, I guess.
Well, you're certainly a master. You've become a master at it. How long have you been working with holography now?
Well, like I say, I mean, the first lenticulars I made were in, I think, 88.
Wow.
So, well, you know,
yeah.
And the first rounds with Nick Phillips were 88. And then I guess it was the end of 88. And then I started at the Royal College in 1990. But again, you see, they're all small steps because, you know, a lot of holography was about processing films, and I'd already had, as I say, I'd already had 10 years doing that, and you know, exposure and mixing chemistry and all that stuff. None of that was new to me, and so everything happens in sort of small steps, I guess, and you accrue knowledge that you don't really appreciate. You know, it's subliminal that you absorb all these techniques and ways of doing things, and when you need to solve problems, that background enables you to sort of move forward much more quickly than otherwise.
So Charles Wheaton first published an explanation of stereopsis in 1838. Surprisingly, a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. He was a polymath, you know. He invented like spy encryption, and he did telegraphy, and he did everything. I mean,
wow.
The stereo was his Christmas cracker for him. he was an absolute genius.
So, I mean, that was, I guess that was considered to be the first introduction to this medium, and then almost 200 years later, the possibilities have expanded boundlessly as a result of the work of scientists, designers, and so on, culminating in the work that you're creating now. And where do you see the evolution of this medium going in your own work?
Well, I quite like the fact that the technology is well established. I spent 10 years involved in some ways in developing holographic technology, and specifically digital holographic technology, and the kind of work that now MIT are doing with spatial light modulators, and now it's very complex, and you've got volumetric displays, and you've got displays. I suppose an extension of that is things like the drones that work together to produce images in the sky would be another one. But I kind of like the fact that once the digital lenticular photography was pretty well established, that it wasn't a case of you developing the medium. It was a case of developing the content. Now, I do build camera systems, but I've intentionally backed off from trying to reinvent everything. I know there's some people involved in my field who, would much rather spend 6 months building their own camera. I'd rather buy one from B&H or whatever. I don't want to invent specific technology, but I do develop specific techniques. And the thing I'm doing tomorrow, I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing, but it will be a first in terms of how no, I'm not going to say anything. You have to wait. It'll come out next year, but it'll be a first in a completely new way of shooting lenticulars. But I mean, it'll be another year before anything of that comes out. But I mean, people won't necessarily see a massive difference between the work that you're doing now, which showing now, which involved a huge amount of planning and set building and technical know-how. So I try and push it to where I need it to go, and not 1 inch further is my answer. Because you can spend too much of your life doing that, and it's not what I want to be doing.
It sounds so exciting, whatever you are doing tomorrow, the beginning of this process. And too bad we all have to wait a year to find out.
Oh, it might be longer.
Can you tell us more about the conceptual context behind the creation of your works?
Well, I think just to cover that whole area, I think pictures are a language themselves, and I think when you translate it into words, always a lot of it is lost. And I think that there is I did a piece called Mary's Room, and there's a video of it on YouTube about a concept called qualia, and it's about how you can know everything about something, but when you experience it, that you gain additional knowledge beyond that which can be learned. And I think that looking at my work is a bit like that. I think you can talk about it and you can say nice things, and people write essays. If you go on, you can look at my catalogue online where people have written pieces about each series. But I think there's a visceral, experiential side to seeing the work itself, which is beyond words. But I would say that I work in a more of a sort of literary form of what I'd call magical realism. Mm-hmm. So, people like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Neil Gaiman, where you put magical and unusual things in very everyday environments. Haruki Murakami is another writer that I just read his book, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. I don't know if you've read that book. It's quite a good book to look at. But so the figures, when you look at my work, it kind of all looks very straightforward. So if you take, for example, the girls in the box, they're almost all the positions that she's in are physically impossible positions to adopt. And I take, similarly taking, pictures, done a lot of work underwater. I directed a kids' TV show at Pinewood Studios and got to use the underwater studios there. And your body adopts unusual shapes underwater. And one innovation, if you like, that I did is that normally, because your eyes are in this plane, when you take stereo pictures, you always take them in this plane. But what I did is I switched all the cameras this way and moved the camera vertically and then put them back into the normal mode. And so I had a monitor with everything tilted, so I could pose the model in the final position. But when you looked at it, she'd be doing these, things that were quite, normal positions, but a bit unusual. But when flipped, then she started to defy gravity, and she'd be suspending herself with a finger or a toe. So that's what I mean by the magical realism. It's like, at first glance, it doesn't look like there's anything going on at all. But when you look deeper into it, they're all in positions which are completely unnatural. So, the girls in Threshold and hopefully you can see in like Juno, those are not positions that you can adopt in the real world. You cannot do those things. And I'm not going to tell you how I did Juno, but it was a bit of sort of, I consulted with a magician and got some hints and tricks. But so I'm working within this sort of unusual things that on the surface look normal, but actually are impossible. And I think in many ways that would be a sort of metaphor for life and for nature. It's every day and everything. Everyone takes everything for granted, and yet you don't have to go very far to see it's completely magical.
That's so beautiful.
That's kind of the concept behind a lot of it.
Very well said.
Magical.
Yeah.
I don't know if it makes sense, but
makes sense to me.
I mean, I read a lot of books around quantum mechanics and the psychology of seeing, and I love, for example, the work of James Turrell, where he uses light and shape to completely disorientate yourself. And I've seen a lot of Turrell's installations. He had 3 simultaneously in America, and just by chance I saw the one at the Guggenheim, one at Houston, and one at LACMA, and I saw them all that year, and got a massive hit. I don't know when it was, a few years ago now, but I was very lucky to see everything. And of course he made he got holograms made for him. I don't know if you know that. He did quite a lot of holography.
Yeah.
So
yes, so we have the museum, Mass MoCA here in the Berkshires is the largest contemporary art museum in the country. And there's a very large scale Turrell exhibit on currently and for, I think, quite some time. And wow. A lot of light installations and some of his holograms are there as well. Yeah. We're very, very lucky to have those so close to home here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of the figures being depicted in different ways, some of your figures appear to be, floating or in free fall, and some are in boxes or tight spaces. What is the significance between this choice that you make and the meaning of the images?
Well, I think the meanings are similar
yes.
in that they depict this sort of liminal space between one state and another. And it's almost like a sense of entropy towards disorder, that things are just about to fall apart. And it's this, that's why it's, capturing the invisible. Is this the things you can't see because they happen too quickly. Again, they're kind of related to quantum mechanics in a way. The spaces themselves, one thing I do it very much is I try and work with the medium. So I work within volumes of space that the lenticular process can depict well. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you've ever seen a lenticular of a landscape. It doesn't look like that. It looks, you can't depict a landscape with a lenticular because you don't have the depth. But for me, that volume of a box where you take a figure as a starting point for an idea, and then you use that volume of space to do something in. I found that a very kind of rich seam to mine, and I kept doing it and doing it and doing it, and I think the human body, specifically single human bodies, are a very good sort of canvas on which to base your lenticular art for that reason. I mean, a lot, for example, I'm told often that from a distance, a lot of them are very graphic, that it's only when you come close that you see the people. And that's also intentional. But the way that the cube describes this volume of space in which to work, for me, may be a bit like, like a painter deciding on how big to start a canvas or something. I start with this volume of space, and then I work within that. So, and then obviously you go on the sort of, do down different paths to see what else you can do with it. But I find coming back, like perhaps a painter might use the same motifs. I find myself always coming back to this volume of space that needs to be filled. And I still think there's an awful long way to go in that. But they're not specifically images about women. I do men as well. And it's just, someone asked me the other day, they said, name five artists that everyone would know. And I said, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, and Picasso. And they went, yeah, okay, I'll go with that. Like everyone would know those artists. And I was thinking about that. And every one of those painted naked women. It's like been the bread and butter of fine art throughout history. And I kind of, I'm not unaware of that. And I thought, what about if you take something that is so prevalent and so common, a bit like a musician takes 8 notes or whatever, and and writes a new song. Take something that's so prevalent, so common, and then try and do something that no one's ever seen before. So that was a sort of challenge to myself, you know, both within the medium and in the context of sort of content of fine art historically. I thought that was quite a nice challenge to set yourself.
Yeah. And where do you find your models?
Well, these days they come to me. I get a lot of requests.
Are they mostly dancers?
Yeah, they almost always have a background in ballet.
Yeah.
Especially the males were all from the Royal Ballet.
Right.
Or, I mean, they weren't at the Royal Ballet, but they'd always been involved in it, because I thought, where can you get those kind of athletic tone? I didn't want to do athletes. And in fact, the regimes for those dancers is more strict than for any other profession. Their training regime, their eating regime, everything they do is designed for this kind of to enable them to move. And so I thought, well, that's going to be the perfect kind of subject matter for what I'm doing. On from the female figures. So I went after them. I knocked on the door of the Royal Ballet, and Sadler's Wells here as well.
We're really excited to be debuting 2 of your newest series, Threshold and Juno. And although they're different visually and contextually, they have some similarities, as you were speaking about earlier. And you have said that they're both about the ascension of the human soul, what it feels like to be a god. Can you expand a little further on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, only superhumans can attain those positions in those images. I mean, Juno was the Roman goddess who kind of oversaw Rome and kind of looked after everyone's interests. And I suppose in that sense, I guess that was something to do with the pandemic and everything. I mean, I'm not saying, maybe it was subliminal. I didn't sit down and try and think up ideas that would say that. But I think, when you look back, then that kind of seems to be what they've been about. And I think Matthew Rake, who's an arts writer, always sort of plucks really good senses out of the images. But I certainly wouldn't sit down and say, I'm going to do some photographs about this and then proceed to do it. I usually do sort of little thought experiments in my head. What if this happened? What if that happened? And then usually there's like a kind of, a sort of eureka moment, and you just think, I don't have to think anymore about this one because it's come to me. The idea has come to me, and now I've got to spend the next 6 months doing it. So as I say, they're not prescriptive. If you want to learn what they're about, then read the essays in the catalogue.
So a great deal of your work is figurative, but you have several series that are floral and even abstract. And one of the images in this current exhibition is the recreation of a still life by Jan van Huysum, which is part of a newly released series, Quotidian Objects. What inspired you to create this and the other non-figurative bodies of work?
Well, my father was an abstract painter,
Oh,
and so I was surrounded by. You can see his work. It's www.tomrob.co.uk. So you can. He's got a website, and he was doing sort of abstract landscape paintings. You know, it's going back to why I was doing landscape photography very early on. I was surrounded by it. But so I've done a lot of abstracts. I wanted to create sort of three-dimensional paintings, and I think that is a massively untapped area of things I'd love to pursue. I've got a studio. I've got a small, what I call like a studio I can get dirty, and at the moment it's full of massive canvases covered in paint. And I'm always working on abstract stuff, kind of in my free time, as it were, because you know there's a demand for the figurative work, and it obviously it's my main sort of focus. But you know, again, you know, I did a degree in botany, and I was my creative director Richard. I think really came up with the idea of those specific floral ones, because there are a lot of these images in the National Gallery, and I just, you know, you look at them and you think, well, you have to translate that into 3D, and it was a lot of fun. And we got one of the curators who works with the National Gallery to advise us on all the flowers. So they have a flower person, a real, you know, someone who deals in flowers, who comes in and talks about the flowers. So we got her. And now she was able then to get these amazing tulips from Holland. And on the end of that shoot, that's when I started doing the Rorschach series of flowers. And then I started growing them myself at home. And that, you know, I don't know if you've ever had a garden, but you know, the sense of it's life affirming to grow things. It really is. And unless you do it, you go, oh yeah, grow your own carrots, great. You know, I'd rather buy them from the supermarket. But you know, waiting for those flowers, you know, I'd buy big boxes of variegated bulbs, so you never knew quite what was coming up. And then I set up in the studio usually used for painting, I set up a kind of 6 weeks, a very complex lighting rig to photograph these flowers in 3D. So as they bloom, you know, some days you get nothing, sometimes you get 3. And just that kind of having to work with nature and seeing new life come out. I mean, you know, it takes some beating. And so, and obviously I got a degree in botany, you know, would be an obvious answer. You know, why wouldn't I be interested in flowers? Although obviously doing a degree in something, you really learn the sort of chemistry of them, not you don't learn how to name them, that's for sure. But you know, I'm always interested in plants and growing them yourself. And there's another series with the game. I don't know if you've seen those. You know, I just think they look absolutely in 3D. And there's all sorts of little details in there that you wouldn't necessarily notice at first glance. So there's all sorts of little animals and beetles and lots of butterflies and bees and all sorts of funguses. And, you know, you can really, you know, I can spend ages looking at them because there's so many little hidden gems in there. And when you see them in 3D as sets, you know, I think they really are quite unsung heroes of my sort of canon in a way. But we're working on some things at the moment where they'll be seen more widely. Again, I can't sort of say much about it, but you know, they're not going to be forgotten, because you know, you can't have these flowers. You know, they're absolutely, you know, they're generated by a human. They're manipulated beyond their natural form. So they're another form of that magical realism, really.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds like the floral work really goes back to your roots, and you have a personal connection to
there are some
work.
figures as well, but you haven't seen them. I've got this one where there's a figure lying down, which was shot in 3D. And then in the studio, I made a big floral arrangement and then did a kind of 5-day time lapse of the flowers dying, and then composite them together. So you've got this figure, and as you walk around it in 3D, you go like through a week of time as the flowers decay.
That sounds amazing.
Oh, there's a huge amount of work that isn't released. There just aren't enough hours in the day. But and also, Richard and I have been out in the woods with a huge mirror, which is another series that I'd really like to pursue, because it looks magical. I mean, we literally took this enormous circular mirror out in double-sided, real glass, a nightmare, but and it suspended it in the middle of a forest and had it turning and photographed that in 3D. And again, it's back to this like portals into everyday spaces, but and yet, you know, it just looked. For me, I mean, maybe it's quite selfish, but just doing it was enough. You know, I didn't really have to make any art. Just the act of it. It was just like just a fantastic thing to do, and we're going to do more of those as well. So there's a lot you don't see, but you know, I'd hope that the best stuff gets on the walls. You know, I'm not purposely holding back anything.
Sounds so exciting. I can't wait. So if you go to www.sohnfineart.com and click on the current exhibition, you will see the information for the current exhibition, which includes the exhibition catalog and Jeff Robb's catalog. You can also learn some more about Jeff Robb's process by visiting some of the videos on YouTube.
Yeah, that's got pictures of me in the studio setting up camera systems and, you know, the more technical side of it. But you can see there's lots of cameras and lots of wires and lots and lots of equipment.
All right, Jeff, thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it. It was so wonderful to hear about your process and your growth as an artist. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this for us.
Thank you for listening.